Good afternoon and welcome to our third series of Let's Talk Poultry. My name is Rebecca Tierney and I'm the Poultry Advisor here with Teagasc. This webinar series is aimed at bringing relevant and up-to-date information to you, our poultry producers across the island of Ireland. Today I'm joined by Robbie Hagwood. Robbie is going to talk to us about getting back to basics when it comes to layer management, good flock recording and how that can help your farm to run to its optimum. Ellie Radford, Hoover Farmer, and Callum Turner, St. David's Poultry Team will speak to us on Coxsey in the next 2 weeks. They're going to look at how best to prevent Coxsey, the impact it can have on production, and the clean out following outbreak. Then Conor Sheehy will return to us on the 11th of August to speak to us about footpad dermatitis. What is footpad dermatitis, how it happens, how to manage it, and why this is an important issue for broiler farmers. We've added another date also. So on August 25th, Carla Gomez from Animal Health Ireland is going to speak to us regarding the biosecurity audits that are being offered for free by AHI to our poultry producers. These webinars are being recorded and will be available to view on the Teagasc website along with the presentations put together by our speakers. Before we begin, I want to draw your attention to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Please submit any questions you have for Robbie as we go through the presentation, and we'll answer those at the end. I'm going to introduce Robbie now. So Robbie was brought up in Zimbabwe, where he attended agricultural college. He worked for a multinational company, Aber Acres, in the early 80s and enjoyed 8 years in many aspects of poultry management. Robbie has worked with most areas of poultry: broiler, layer, hatchery, milling, abattoir and marketing, but mainly based on the breeding and selection of pure lines for further crossing into commercial breeds. He then had his own breeder farm and hatchery, producing mainly broiler day-olds and a fair amount of layer day-olds as well. In 2000, with economic decline of the agro industry in Zimbabwe, Robbie took various contracts to advise and manage different poultry enterprises through Africa. In 2008, he moved over to the UK and found a great advising niche in the egg producing industry, which also expanded into Ireland. And most recently, Robbie has joined an international group of poultry services based in Edinburgh as an independent consultant. So I'm delighted to have Robbie here as a bit of a test run for his presenting skills for that new endeavour. So Robbie, I'll hand over to you and I'll ask you to begin your presentation.
Good afternoon, Rebecca, and thank you very much. Good pleasure to be able to try and discuss and share some things on here. And I just wanted to go through and say that although this may be very repetitive for a lot of people, and they've heard it time and again, I think that it's pretty important to go through these basic sort of topics. You'll find that I've got 2 pages that I've started off with, just listing through the sections that we're going to cover. There's one of them, there's another one of them, and then we're going to actually go into it. So we're going to be starting with support of the birds during the laying period. Right, single age sites are highly advantageous for various reasons, bacterial and viral control. The other thing that's very difficult is to control workers going between different ages when you have 2 or more flocks of different ages on one farm. So I'd have a good think about that first, because it does definitely impact on the economic viability of the whole operation. Decide the size of eggs that you require in free market, which will lead on to things like the choice of breed that you're going to go for, the choice of the pullet grower, because they have different systems, and whatever system you've got, you need to consider that the pullet rearer has a system that's going to be compatible with your own production system. You also want to discuss the vaccination program and do this in conjunction with your vet as well, because they will know the vaccines that need to be used to cover your birds while in lay, and you need to vaccinate for these while the birds are still in the rearing section. Discuss a lighting program with the pullet grower. This is very important on your egg size as well. Different lighting programs will give different egg sizes. Also decide the age that you're going to move the birds, what diet they're going to be on, and what your target mass for those birds is going to be at the time that you move them. Yeah, there's not really much point in moving in birds that are at 1 kg. You're going to have to feed them for quite a long time. However, you've got to assess as well that they may benefit from being able to settle down in their new environment. So that is something you need to consider. Know and plan for the target depopulation age, so that you will know right at the beginning what you're aiming for and how to handle and manage your flock of birds. We tend to find that a smaller egg, a medium egg, lasts with egg quality for longer at the end of the production cycle. So it means that you can possibly extend to 85 weeks old, whereas if you're producing huge, big, large eggs, by 75 weeks old, you find that those eggshell qualities are really going down. So consider that. Right, then we will go on to our next topic, which is the importance of record keeping. This is not just to comply with standards agencies and compliances. This is a powerful farm tool, and it gives you the ability to adapt and predict your management. Also helps setting the benchmarks and standards of your own farm against industry and breed standards. I've put bed standards, sorry about that. And then we go on to what are we going to record? So all the basics: egg production, seconds eggs, floor eggs, feed, water, temperatures. And I would even go on to say, if you can, try and monitor the air as well. CO2 and ammonia, very good if you can do that, and some systems will do this. So once you've got those into place, you can record. Now, what I've seen on a few farms, and I encourage it, is to have last flock's production right alongside this year's standard production, so that you can monitor last year to this year. And it's amazing the things that come up and remind you. And oh yeah, our egg size is compatible to last year, and oh yeah, we're not eating as much feed as last year. These are all good little tools that help you achieve what you want to. You also record and pre-record this, write it all out: vaccinations, parasite control, which is red mite, worms, the litter conditions. How deep is the litter? When did you add in new litter? This all helps, and from year to year, you get better at it, especially when you've got these records. Now, I've also say that you should be serology testing. That's having bloods taken and the titer levels to what you're testing, the different vaccinations that the birds have had, where they are, they stand, and what you might need to do in future. And these are good records to show your vet as well. Right, then we will go on to shed preparation. Well, the preparation for a shed before having your new flock come in starts when the last birds leave. So you'll clean out that shed, and you want to make sure and inspect it after clean out, and again after fumigation. Make sure that shed's whistle clean. I've put in here testing compliance. I think we all test for salmonella before birds arrive. And then TBC is total bacteria count. So it's a good idea to take swabs, and it's even better to do it before you've cleaned out the house and after you've cleaned out the house, which would give a very good idea of how effective that clean out has been. Correct feed ordering. there are different types of feed. We want to make sure for the age of bird that is coming in, we have the right feed. So if the birds come in early, they are going to require grower rations. And we need to take that into consideration. Water lines, make sure they're clean and flushed. It's amazing how many times, oh, the water is not on, and it hasn't been flushed, and there's dirty stuff coming through. It's a simple thing to do. Make sure you flush the lines before the hens, just before the hens arrive. It also makes sure that they have nice, clean, fresh, cool water, and cool water makes a very big difference after they've been moved. Have your vitamins, electrolytes, and probiotic stocks. If you're using a probiotic, make sure you have enough of those on hand for when the birds arrive. Electrolytes are extremely useful when temperatures are elevated in summer, and it gets the birds drinking and eating again. Try and get your house temperatures cooler to start off with. It encourages the birds to feed better. I like 16 degrees, but I've seen people starting as low as 15. It helps. Next one is light intensity and total hour setup. So for the first 3 or 4 hours after the last birds have been unloaded, you want, and during that period, you want the lights same level of intensity as they were in the rearing shed. After they've been there for 3 or 4 hours and they've got used to it, then bring up the lights full for 2 days. Well, not full, but very bright. You want the birds to be able to walk everywhere, see everything, and investigate the shed for themselves. Also, at this stage, make sure you've conversed with the grower to find out how many hours of lights the birds are getting, and try and match the daytime startup and the nighttime switch off of the lights. Generally, you're going to be between 9 and 10 hours of light as the birds arrive. If you're going into early production, they will probably be on 10 or 11 hours. Okay, let's go on to our next one, which is site preparation. We want to make sure all biosecurity measures are in place, and this is extremely important. And as we know at the moment, we're facing all sorts of problems with different viruses coming around and knocking everyone really hard. And vehicles and equipment and personnel really need to be, there's a huge emphasis on this. Feed delivery access, as well as making sure that the vehicles have the biosecurity measures. Pullet moving vehicle as well, they need good access. The last thing you want to have happen is a vehicle gets stuck in the driveway and just the whole operation comes to a bit of a grinding halt. Birds overheat on vehicles. It really should be taken care of. The notifications that I have there is just make sure that you've got things up to say people are not allowed to come onto site unless they have observed these rules and are complying to them. You also want to make sure you put in your vermin controllers all up to date, not just signed off. It really does need to be very, very well handled. Site preparation is, I can't tell you how extremely important it is. Right, planned arrival of the hens, stressful for the hens. The moving is very stressful. You've got to remember that every bird is also having a needle being stuck in its leg. So, handling of the birds is a very important one. Carrying of the birds, we don't want to carry too many birds in one hand. It damages and hurts the birds, and that will impact on them because the rate of growth will not be as even as it should be. We then want to look at the time of loading. It's better to move pullets in the cool of the day. So it's better to have those pullets loaded up wherever they are in the late night or early morning, and then they will travel to you. And you want to plan this to make sure that you have all the enough loading people there, the vehicles had enough time to travel. And it also depends on the time of the year, obviously. You don't want to travel too early in the morning in the middle of winter, but morning travel might be preferable to traveling during the day in winter. I've said before that the lights, make sure that the lights are all set up, ready for the birds before they arrive. Consider the electrolytes in the water for birds that have been traveling. I would let the birds in there, and after 5 hours, start running the feeders often. Try and manually feed for the first couple of days. Get the birds used to that sound, although they should be ready, but some birds are brought up with pans in the rearing. So run your feeders often, get those chains rattling, and it soon trains the birds into what they need to do. Check that the staffing is adequate and trained. Yeah, so often you will find that, oh, who's going to be coming to check these at night, and no one sorted it out. Make sure your staff are trained. This is a consideration that is required as well. I think it's law that the person looking after the birds has had adequate training. Look at the vaccine type, because sometimes people will be putting in vaccine as the birds arrive on the farm. So those are all things that need to be planned for before the hens arrive. Let's go on to PreLay considerations. I know it's sort of, it does sound as though I'm repeating myself here, but there are things to consider, like running the nest boxes, running the egg belts and opening and closing the nest boxes. Let the birds get used to this. The lighting program, the hours and the intensity. Write out your basic lighting schedule so do you know in advance where you think you're going to go, because there's nothing like getting into there. Oh, I should have switched on the lights 2 weeks ago. That's pretty bad. But if you have it all written and planned up, it's an easy thing to do. Build up calcium in the bird, in her bones. She's still growing right up to around 27 weeks old. And the calcium in her bones is going to aid with making sure that the egg quality is good. If there's not enough availability of calcium in the feed, it just comes out of the bones of the bird. So we want to use, if we need to, make sure that we use vitamin D3, which will help the uptake of calcium. Give the bird space. You know, all the planning on the chicken housing is meant for the scratch area as well. And very often we close them up. Now, you know, everyone has a different management technique, and a lot of things work better for some and don't work for others. But the more space you give the birds, the happier they're going to be, the more even their body growth rates are going to be. All around a better condition also helps with getting air coming into the house. Do crack open the range pop holes as well. You want the birds to be able to look out and see where they're going to be going to and get used to it. You know, it's a huge shock on the birds when they've been in a house, housed up for several weeks, and they're just getting into lay. They're under the most stressful demands that they have, and someone suddenly flings open the pop holes and they see all the outside come streaming in. It can be a huge shock to birds, and I've seen it so many times. So allow the flock to become very familiar with their new housing system. Hygiene basics. Yeah, we just can't stress these things enough. Foot dips, hand sanitizer, step overs, PPE. And that's a note. I think we should be calling it poultry protection equipment, not personal protection. We're using this equipment to protect our flocks as well as ourselves. So those are important things. check the water is clean. I mean, this is a basic hygiene. If we've got dirty water coming into the house, we're going to infect the birds with something. So clean water. Clean feed. Now, quite often we have the bins sweating when warm, fresh food is brought into our silos. And we need to check this, keep an eye on it. Sometimes it builds up on the side and becomes quite toxic before it falls back in and gets used in the feed probably a few days later. So I want to check that. Mold-free litter. When you do buy your bales, just open them up and have a look. If you've got mold in them, please don't use them. A basic thing, but it can save lots of problems. I personally recommend the use of a probiotic. The probiotic does introduce large amounts of lactic acid in the bird system, which has a really good effect on controlling bacteria like E. coli. It helps with Salmonella, Campylobacter. Probiotics are a very, very good thing. We have taken the birds out of their natural environments and we've put them into a very crowded environment with a lot of birds. And they're not, especially at first, able to walk around outside picking up bits and pieces of soil, ground, all sorts, and natural probiotics. So my advice is do use probiotics. Use line on the range. You don't need to go sort of 50 meters away from the house, but a 10 meter to the house walls all the way around the outside has a very good effect at controlling bacteria that, and in fact, even viruses that might be coming in. Now, if you do that and you've got lime on there, wild birds coming over and taking a bit of a dump or something in that area, at least it's going to be somewhat sanitized. So yeah, it is a good idea to do that. Bringing the hens into lay. This is something that I think I was certainly guilty of, especially in my younger years, is just trying to give too much attention. Leave the hens to get on with their laying and sort out their own pecking order. They have a social order. Some of them are going to want to lay first, some of them later, and we do get problems with this at times. And if we keep interfering, walking right past the pop holes and the birds are trying to settle down, we are really giving them a tough time as well, more than we need to. I would say check along the nest boxes early in the morning and don't go near the nest boxes again until the mid-afternoon after the laying period has finished. Once they're in really good, strong lay, yes, you can start going towards the nest boxes once they've settled down and they know their regime. Access to the scratch area in the afternoons after their laying period is very, very important. I prefer to see access to the scratch at all times, but as I say, everyone has different management techniques, and what works for you is the best. During the laying, right from the beginning, vitamin D3 supplement, I think it's a fantastic thing. There are various products out there, and it is good to supplement with the vitamin D3. D3 will also help pick up immunities, help the bird to build immunities, bacterial and viral. So it's very, very cheap. So why not use it? Picking up the floor eggs and training the birds. Yes, whenever you leave an egg, within a few minutes, there will be a sister egg next to it. So we do need to make sure we pick up those floor eggs regularly. Weekly average body weight and uniformity. And a very important tool. You know where your birds are going, if they're gaining the weight they need to gain, because they cannot produce their eggs unless they have the body weight to do that. So as well, doing that weekly weighing gets you to know your birds. You will pick them up and feel them and handle them. It also helps calm the birds down when they get handled like that. Try and not walk around the house picking up one at a time. Try and catch a few hens, 20 hens, minimum 20 hens, I would say 50, and weigh them all at once. Then as the flock is coming into lay, we start dealing with ammonia. So please open up the ventilation. Make sure that we don't get ammonia buildup. Ammonia is devastating to production. I've put temperature control there. Now, I would rather see a temperature down at 12 degrees and lots of air going through the house than trying to keep a temperature up and there's a huge ammonia problem. Hens are not going to suffer down at 12 degrees. They will warm up a bit later in the day, but really keep ammonia at check. And then I've put here that this is a good time to do your first set of blood screening, serology. Take bloods, minimum of 20 bloods per flock, between 23 and 26 weeks. 25 is probably the optimum time because they would have developed all their antibodies from the vaccines that they've had in the rearer. If you test them as they arrive, some of these vaccines won't have given immunity yet. So the first time, the good time to check these is at about 25 weeks old. Our next topic is a strategized feed program. Feed times, as I said earlier, start with quite a few hand runs at first. Running the feeders by hand, it gives you an idea. You check on the birds, you see what they're doing, and you run it several times to get them eating. From there, we wanted to reduce the number of runs and put them onto an automatic clock between 3 and 4 times a day. Some flocks only require to be fed twice a day. It absolutely depends on your management and how the birds respond to your management. What I will say is you want to have 2/3 of the feed given in the last 18 hours before the laying commences in the morning. The reason for this is it builds up their available calcium reserve to lay down a shell on the egg at the right time. So only 1/3 of that feed in the morning, quite soon after the birds have had the lights come on. Then we want a good strip out period, 4 to 5 hours, where all the feed is finished in the feeders. That makes sure that all the fines get used up and eaten, which is where a lot of the minerals and vitamins are. So we want to do that. Then follow the breed specifications, cut down protein, which costs a lot of money as the birds get older. So we can go from like 17% all the way down to 14.5%, for example, and increase your calcium. And I put there and metabolized energy. When you take protein away, you need to replace it with metabolized energy. So you then have your different stages of feed and have that all planned and strategized out. Support during the laying period. Clean food, water, air, slats, scratch. We can, I say it again, we can keep repeating it. Grit is very often added into the feed, especially in Ireland, I've noticed. Some mills don't put any grit into the feed and you will need to supplement. And the best thing you can use quite possibly is oyster shell grit if you're able to get it. As the birds have gone through their peak production, reduce the lighting intensity. I can say to you, we should go from 20 lux down to 10 lux, but it all depends on the housing and your own management. It may only need to go from 15 lux down to 7 lux. This is all something that we just need to take into consideration. By reducing the light, we're reducing the strain on the birds. We're hopefully going to get them to retain egg quality and feather cover by bringing down these lights. Serology testing, again, at 50 weeks old. This gives you a very good idea of where you're sitting with resistance to any of the viral diseases. So yeah, do that. And if anything new crops up, discuss with your vet about changing your rearing program vaccinations. Then continued support against red mite, worms, flies, rodents, and predators. That's just an ongoing thing. Hopefully you've got a program that you've made up and you keep to it. Access to the range, very important, and try and keep all the vegetation cropped off. If it's allowed to grow and then cut down, you will find that there's going to be a buildup of mice and all sorts of things in the outside on the range, which you don't want. So keep the range grass short. Shade on the trees helps the birds, or if you have supplementary shaders, this helps them from overheating on hot days, where they will often go under those for some time before they get out back into the pastures. So shaded trees are very important for supporting that laying period. Vaccinations and parasite control. Correct vaccination procedure is imperative. There's no point in doing it incorrectly and the treatment doesn't work at all. So I would say try and get some training on delivering vaccines, even your parasite controls for worming. Do it correctly. It's just no point in throwing it away by not doing it correctly. Your vet should have the correct guidance and procedure. Quite often I've seen the vets come out and help people do the vaccinations. Keep to the correct vaccine timing levels. So if you are going to be vaccinating for infectious bronchitis, for example, right through lay, and you have an 8-week interval program, keep it to that 8 weeks. You may find that going to 10 weeks because you forgot about it for 2 weeks is just that long enough period to let something slide in. So important to keep to that. You make sure your drinker lines are clean prior to use of vaccine. Again, that will kill vaccines if they are not nicely clean. All designated vaccine equipment, sorry, excuse me. All dedicated vaccine equipment must be thoroughly cleaned in fresh water. No point in putting soap and antiseptics and things like that on it, which will kill the vaccine. Have a schedule in place to carry out red mite control, with whichever method you're going to use. And again, make sure that you stick to it, because dropping it out just isn't going to help that vaccine control. If you have a period for a gap, the red mite comes straight back. Have a regular planned worming schedule. Between 6 and 10 weeks is the commonly used one. And I said use glass plates to check for worms. It's quite easy to get 2 flat pieces of glass. Put some of the some dung in there and just squeeze those glasses together, and you'll very quickly see if there's worms, even worm eggs in that glass. It's a brilliant way of checking it. Medications, right? This is what got drummed into me in my early years in poultry. Medication is an excuse for insufficient management. That was what was taught at the colleges when I was there, which is many years ago now, but I think it's as relevant today and maybe even more relevant than it was before. And only ever medicate on advice of your veterinarian. I think that's also something very important. Feather loss control. Well, hens will be well feather covered. And there are numerous publications. I think the Ministry even has, Ministry of Agriculture has a publication on and guidance onto feather control and stopping feather loss. Remember that most of feather loss is caused by stress, and that's when the birds lose feather. Whatever type of stress it is, that's where it comes in, and that's what happens. supporting. I've said earlier, as the bird gets older, she will need more calcium to produce those good quality eggs. So we do need to increase calcium in the diet and go back to a vitamin D3 supplement at this age of the bird. That will help them absorb the calcium far more effectively. And it also, as I said earlier as well, it helps with keeping the bird's immune system intact. Continue vaccinations and pest controls measures right up to near the end of the birds. To say, oh, well, we've only got 8 weeks left, we're not going to vaccinate anymore or doings. Well, that unfortunately is just leaving a big fat gap for things to go wrong in your next flock. So keep it controlled right the way through. Then do a final serology testing, blood screening at around 70 weeks old. This will tell you how the bird's immunity is sitting, if the vaccines are still working. If they're not working, you might need a redesign on your vaccination program in rearing and in laying. And the reason that we have continuous vaccination through lay is because if we were to leave it until the birds were 65 weeks old and come along and give them an IB vaccination, that'll just knock their system flying. So we tend to keep giving these vaccinations every 6 to 10 weeks, depending on where your vet sees you need it, which keeps the whole bird's immune system accustomed to this vaccine, so they don't have an adverse reaction to it. Planning your population. Yeah, every good flock, unfortunately, has to come to an end, and maintain a good feed right up to the last 2 days, and then a maintenance diet. Unfortunately, if we go into a maintenance diet too early, the birds will lose weight when they're starting to go to the abattoir. And this is just, it's bad welfare. We don't want to do that. A good feed right up till 2 days before the birds are due to exit. Don't deny access to the scratch. This is just another stress on the bird. They're used to getting into the scratch area, so continue that. Do stop feeding 12 hours before loading. This makes sure that there isn't a dirty bacterial mess in the abattoir when the birds are processed. So it also stops the trucks from getting very dirty. So I know it might sound a bit silly, but there's a very good reason for it. However, do not stop the water. Those birds need access to water right up until the time that they're caught. Make sure that there's an overseer for the catches, and really good animal husbandry welfare is implemented at this time. It's all too easy for untrained staff to come in here and wreak havoc at this time. And we want the birds, even though they're going to be slaughtered, we don't want them dying before they arrive there. And don't load sick birds either. This also only helps just to make a huge, great mess of the whole moving system. Turnaround cleaning program. Use this period as an insurance for your next flock. In other words, if you get it properly emptied and cleaned out and ready, you are building up big insurance for your next flock, that they're not going to be contaminated by whatever was in there before. If you can, and I thoroughly suggest this, plan for a minimum of 2 weeks with no hens on site at all. This break on having birds does break cycles of continuous problems that may come in from flock to flock. And it's one of the reasons that we can see why single ages on a site is just a far better idea all the way through. Thorough manure clean out and removal from site. There's no good on taking all that manure out of the house and dumping it outside, because it will be, remnants of it will be brought back in. So it needs to be removed from site. high pressure clean down with the house and the equipment, then a detergent wash down, then hose off all the detergent. You should by now hopefully have a really gleaming clean house and equipment, disinfect and spray it out, then leave your house to dry. Usually a 24-hour period with the ventilation fan switched on will dry it out. Once it's dry, you want to fumigate. Now, some people may argue that fumigation is more effective while the house is still wet. I don't know this, but my standard practice is to let the house dry out and then fumigate, which creates its own huge humidity as well, depending on the method used. And then again, give it a clear out period for the air where you want to close up for 24 hours. Once the 24 hours is up, switch on the ventilation and clear out, air it, dry it for another 24 hours. I've put in a bit here on serology testing. Know your chick vaccination program in rare, and ask your grower for results prior to the movement. You'd like to see what vaccines they've had and if they've tested to see that those vaccines are taking and do what they should. Do blood testing, serology, 25 weeks, 50 weeks, and 70 weeks. I think we've gone through that, but there it is again. And use these results to determine the effectiveness of vaccination in the rare, where vaccine starts becoming ineffective, which we know in a lot of the vaccines, it's around 60 weeks. Any new field challenges that may have come in, and how to determine the vaccination for your next flock. Very important thing that very few people are doing, and it really does give results and help. When sampling the blood, make sure that all the flocks on the farm are done at the same time, and you want 20 samples per flock. There's not really much good in sampling only one house because they're 50 weeks old and the other one's only 28 weeks old. When you do the samples, do the whole farm because it gives you a far better picture on your results. And discuss the results with your vet or your pullet grower. Conclusions. I will have missed some important things out. I'm sorry. I tried not to. It may have happened, but I think I've covered the main things. All farmers do have different methods, and those that work best for you and your farm are important. So don't do something just because someone's told you to do it. Consider it and adapt it into your management. Attention to detail is all important with birds. And I've put here, and it's something that I do, just go and sit in the house and observe your birds. You're not being lazy and sitting down. You're learning the nature of these birds and you're picking things up. The detail really is important. And that's also getting used to the different smells in your shed. Never mind the sights and the sounds. You also can tell a lot of things from the smell in the shed. We know that, coccidiosis is extremely apparent to many people. They can smell it. As I have met a lot of people in the industry that can smell when there's a red mite problem. So open up all your senses and keep attention to the details. Look after your hens. If you look after your hens will look after you. Okay, thank you very much. And I'm now going to hand you back to Rebecca.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Robbie. That was a really fantastic presentation. Loads of questions there that we could just delve into a little bit. So we won't delay. With the current outbreak of ILT, do you think producers should ask for the pullets to be tested for it at the rearer site before moving them? We'll start with something very topical. What's your opinion on them being tested for ILT prior to movement?
Sorry, I was muted.
You're all right, you're all right.
A very good idea to test the birds. And as I've said, ask your rearer for results of the pullets when they come to you. Now, I believe that it's quite regular to test for salmonella and AI, so why not test for ILT? May as well do it. Yes.
Perfect. So just you emphasize the importance of biosecurity there in relation to, throughout the flock at the time of clean out, and then for coming in for the birds arriving on site. So for you, when does biosecurity begin following a clean out? Is it when the birds actually arrive on site? Is it at the point when the cleaning and disinfection has been done, fumigation has been done, all those steps are done? At what point is biosecurity beginning, where you're suiting and booting, going in, using your foot dips, doing all those steps?
It starts with your previous flock. Because if your previous flock is well looked after, that's half of your biosecurity problem for the coming flock. So
brilliant. So it really, it can't be emphasized, I suppose, enough, just how important biosecurity is. You just mentioned a point about having your staff trained and having them adequately trained to look after them. But I suppose from my point of view, trained staff is of course vital, but it's crucial to avoid sharing labour between sites. Would you feel that's an important point as well, not to have staff going from site to site? And if it is necessary, like biosecurity, again, change of clothes, change of boots, following up.
I think that it's got to be, you have to be as vigilant as you possibly can. But what I will say is staff going from one site to another site, inevitably there's going to be a break. It will happen. It's not going to be avoided. That's why I say single age is probably one of your most important biosecurity features.
Okay, brilliant. Just in relation to then, you mentioned blood testing there, 25, 50 and 70 weeks. Would you recommend a regular post-mortem, maybe bringing a couple of birds or a bird or two down to your veterinarian, getting it culled and checking for anything?
If you've used those points of attention to detail, you know your birds, and you have carried out your vaccinations and your serology testing, there's no need. If you see something that's not looking good, yes, by all means. But there's not any need. If things are good, there's no need to do that. Okay.
And in terms of blood testing, it's very straightforward. Would you feel a farmer, if shown once or twice by a vet, would be capable of doing that him or herself, or do you think a vet needs to come on site to do that?
No, I think people they should train themselves to do it, or use services that can come in and do it. Right. You don't need a vet to do it. Yes, vets do it quite often when they go around to different farms, but there's no need to call a vet specifically to come and do that. Okay.
At what age do you recommend doing bloods in the rearing house then? If we've talked about doing bloods in the layer house prior to rearing, if the rearer was to do that, at what age should they be done?
Right. Most of the live vaccinations should be done by around 12 or 13 weeks. And you want to give those vaccines 2 weeks to take effect, build up the immunity levels. So 2 weeks after your last live vaccine. Obviously, they're not going to be able to test any of the vaccines that are put into the birds traditionally on transfer. It's another complete topic that I would love to get into, but we'll leave that for today.
Okay. I suppose just two things you mentioned, additives into the water and potentially the feed. So for me, the electrolytes in the water following the birds being moved to site, what advantage has that to the birds once they land on site following their transportation?
Usually you'll find that the birds have dehydrated during transport. They're subjected to quite a bit of wind, temperature buildups, different things, just the length of time that they have been away from water. Now, putting an electrolyte helps the birds rehydrate much quicker. If they're hydrated, they will eat. If they're still thirsty, they're not going to eat. Okay, perfect.
Another question there, just have you any tips on preventing chlor eggs or how best to do that?
This is something that everyone's technique, and it's hard work when the birds are coming into production at first. Like I said earlier, if you if there's an egg on the floor, there will be a sister egg next to it within minutes. So picking up those eggs regularly all the time, but not going near the nest boxes, because if there's an egg just outside the nest box, that bird's learning. Tomorrow it's going to be in the nest box, but do pick them up after the laying period. So I think one of the most important things is picking up any of the eggs that are on the floor or scratch area. And the other one is using a rearer that has the correct setup. Birds that know how to jump up down and use the jump systems are going to be much more adept at getting into a nest box.
Okay, yeah. So having a rearer with the platforms and the multi-tiers there, coming into a multi-tier site is obviously going to assist with that. And they're becoming a hell of a lot more common now, as we do move towards those type of multi-tier systems more regular. You mentioned keeping the temperature down at around 12 degrees would be your preferred temperature to aid in keeping ammonia at bay. You might just tell our listeners what type of impact ammonia could have on our birds if it was to be too high.
Okay, I do say that temperature is coming down to 12. You know, in the middle of the night at its lowest period, temperature coming down to 12 degrees for 4 or 5 hours is not a problem. But ammonia wrecks birds. It's the same as them catching a respiratory disease. We're all worried about our birds getting ILT because there's an ILT scare here. Now, I know from experience that ammonia in a house can give more damaging results than the flock catching ILT. There are other respiratory diseases like ART and Newcastle disease, various things. You know, the same damage is going to happen to the bird when ammonia builds up. Now, when the birds are really badly stressed with respiratory, any type of respiratory problem, they become susceptible, and you have mycoplasmas jumping in, taking advantage of the situation, which just makes everything all the worse again. So avoiding ammonia from the start cuts down a lot of problems.
Yeah, and as you said, like flock recording, producers are looking at their temperatures, their ventilation. If we could start to look at air and recording those ammonia readings, I suppose we would become more aware of it. And it's very straightforward to do that. There's equipment out there that you can purchase and take those ammonia readings, and it will draw your attention to it more, and maybe we could avoid some of those issues. I suppose we'll just finish with just 2 more questions, if you don't mind. Do you recommend live vaccination in production during the production period on a regular basis?
Very definitely. If you try and vaccinate a bird that hasn't had that live vaccine near its system for the last 30 weeks, it is going to have a very strong reaction, which is going to not only upset egg production, it's also going to upset egg quality. So if you're going to put in any type of a booster vaccine, do it right the way through lay.
Okay. And just the last one then, is it important to adjust the feed ration throughout the laying period as the hens' needs change and performance levels decrease, and to maintain egg quality? So I suppose changing from stage 1, stage 2 and stage 3 throughout.
It is important, but you need to learn and speak with the supplier of that feed and make sure that the parameters of their feed are going to match the standards that are required. All too often, farmers, in trying to do a really good thing, go from one feed ration to another feed ration. The birds don't like it. They stand back and look at the feed, and production crashes. And whenever you do change from one ration to another, have at least a 10-day mixed ration between the two.
Okay, perfect. Just one last question on my own. What's your opinion on agroforestry? So the tree planting in the range, can it help with the benefits of reducing stress, increasing production, and potentially maybe reducing the use for medication?
Absolutely. The bird's natural environment, the fowl's natural environment is the jungle. It is a jungle fowl. And if they can jump around on trees and shade, they're much happier birds. A happy bird, an exercise bird, is going to be a far more robust hen than anything, especially trapped up in a cage. So yes, it does make a difference. And I would follow that practice. It's also very good for your land, because the right timber put onto your property, it makes your property more valuable.
Perfect. Robbie, there's so many questions coming in here. I could be here all day asking questions, but unfortunately we have run out of time. So I want to thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Today's presentation and recording of today's webinar will be available on the Teagasc website. So I want to thank you all for attending, for your questions. Apologies if we didn't get to your question, but maybe we'll have Robbie back again and we can pose all those questions to next time around. Thanks again, Robbie. Thanks, Louise, for joining me. And thanks again, everyone. And I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.